The morning after the wedding, Isabel found a note on the breakfast table instead of a husband. It was not cruel. That was what struck her most. It was not even cold, not in the way she had braced herself for. It was simply efficient. 3 lines in a clean hand, the ink still faintly dark against the cream paper, informing her that Mr. Fletcher Hargrove had returned to Boston on account of urgent business, that Mrs. Alderton next door knew the house, and that the household accounts were in the top drawer of the study desk. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and set it beside the teapot. The house was called Arden's Keep, though it was no castle. It sat on 40 acres of northeastern Connecticut farmland that had once been something. She could see that much from the way the stone walls ran, the way the old orchard stood in neat rows, even if the trees were overgrown and thick with unpruned wood. The main house had 6 bedrooms, a formal parlor that smelled of disuse, a kitchen range that required coaxing, and a housekeeper named Mrs. Pell who was 71 years old and had been keeping the house alone for 14 months. Since Mr. Hargrove's first wife passed, Mrs. Pell said, without being asked. She was frying eggs with the focused attention of someone who had learned not to offer information freely, but could not quite help herself. He didn't come back much after that. Isabel looked around the kitchen. The wallpaper near the window had begun to peel at one corner. A bucket sat on the floor by the back door for reasons she did not yet understand. The curtains were clean but faded, the sort of faded that takes years. "How long has the house been in this condition?" she asked. Mrs. Pell turned from the stove. She looked at Isabel the way old women sometimes look at young brides, measuring something that has nothing to do with beauty. "Long enough," she said. Isabel was 24 years old. She had grown up in Albany, the eldest daughter of a man who had built a modest insurance business, and then, in the last 2 years of his life, lost most of it in ways no one in the family quite understood. The arrangement with Fletcher Hargrove had been her father's doing. Fletcher was a distant acquaintance, a man of 38 with a name in manufacturing and a reputation for being honorable if not warm. Her father had called it a practical match. Her mother had called it a blessing. Isabel had called it nothing at all. She had signed the papers, attended the ceremony, shaken the hands of Fletcher's business associates, and arrived at Arden's Keep in a hired carriage the following morning. She was a practical woman. She knew what the marriage was. She had not expected tenderness. She had, however, expected him to stay long enough to show her where the extra blankets were kept. The study was unlocked. The accounts were exactly where the note had promised. She sat down at the desk without taking off her coat, because the room was cold, and she opened the first ledger. An hour later, she was still there. The household accounts went back 4 years. The first 2 years made sense. Reasonable expenditures for a house of this size, staff wages, repairs, provisions. Then, about halfway through the third ledger, something changed. The figures became irregular. Not wrong, exactly. Not the kind of wrong a person would see at a glance, but wrong in the way that a room feels wrong when one piece of furniture has been moved an inch and no one can say why they're uncomfortable. She found a management company listed under operating fees. Halstead Property Services. The fee appeared every quarter, regular as rent. She found no contract. She found no corresponding improvements to the property that would explain the amount. She found instead that the fee had increased 3 times in 4 years, each increase modest enough to be unremarkable on its own, each one adding to a sum that taken together was not modest at all. She closed the ledger. She opened it again. She checked her arithmetic twice, because she had learned long ago not to trust the first answer when the first answer was the one you didn't want. The arithmetic held. She went and found Mrs. Pell. "Halstead Property Services," she said. "What do they manage?" Mrs. Pell wiped her hands on her apron. "They send a man once a month to look at the grounds. That's all I've ever seen. Has anyone ever requested a contract from them? Documentation of services?" "That would be a question for Mr. Hargrove." "Mr. Hargrove," Isabel said, "is in Boston." She spent the afternoon walking the property. The orchard she had already noticed. Behind it, what had once been a kitchen garden was now mostly weeds, though the structure of it was still there. The raised beds, the stone edging, the rusted iron gate between the garden and the back field. She found a barn that was sound but underused, 2 horses that were well cared for, and a groundskeeper named Walt who was 53, forthright, and deeply relieved to have someone ask him a direct question. "The East Field drain's been blocked 2 winters running," he told her. "I've written to the property company about it. Never heard back." "Who did you write to?" He gave her a name. She wrote it down. She wrote down everything. By the end of the first week, she had 3 pages of notes, and a clear picture of what Arden's Keep had been, what it had become, and, more importantly, what it could be again with the right pressure applied to the right places. She also wrote to Fletcher. The letter was not sentimental. She told him about the accounts. She told him about Halstead Property Services, the quarterly fees, the blocked drain, the absent documentation. She laid out the numbers the way her father had taught her to lay out numbers, clean and in columns, so that a person could not pretend not to understand. She asked 3 specific questions and requested a reply within 2 weeks. She did not ask why he had married her. She did not ask when he was coming back. She had decided, somewhere in the second ledger, that those questions could wait. His reply came in 10 days. It was 3 sentences. He thanked her for the summary. He said he would look into Halstead. He said the Eastfield drain was Walt's responsibility. She read it at the breakfast table, the same spot where she had found his note. Mrs. Pell was in the kitchen. The fire had been laid early enough that the room was actually warm for once, because Isabel had asked for that specifically. She folded the letter. She set it next to the teapot. Then she wrote to Halstead Property Services directly. She found their address in the ledger, a Boston office, and she requested, in careful language, a copy of the original service agreement for Arden's Keep, an itemized accounting of services rendered over the past 4 years, and the name and contact information for the managing director. She received no reply. She wrote again. She was polite. She was specific. She gave them a date by which she expected an answer. The date passed. She wrote to Fletcher again. This time she included copies of both letters to Halstead and noted the dates they had been sent. She also included a calculation. The total amount paid to Halstead over 4 years, set against the documented services she could actually verify, which was 1 monthly walkthrough by an unnamed representative, no written reports filed, no improvements completed, no correspondence returned. She did not accuse anyone of anything. She simply let the numbers speak, the way numbers do when you arrange them honestly. Fletcher arrived on a Thursday morning in October, 6 weeks after the wedding. Isabel was in the kitchen garden when Mrs. Pell came to find her. She had spent the last 2 weeks clearing the beds herself, because Walt had enough to do, and she had found that the work helped her think. Her hands were dirty, her coat had a tear in the left sleeve that she had been meaning to mend. She was aware, not what a man might expect to find when he came to visit his new wife. She did not go inside to change. She pulled off her gloves and walked around to the front of the house. Fletcher Hargrove was standing on the front step. He was taller than she remembered from the wedding, or perhaps she simply hadn't been paying close attention then. He had the look of a man who was accustomed to rooms doing what he told them to do, and who was not sure how to proceed when they did not. He looked at her. He looked at the house. Something crossed his face that she couldn't quite name. "You've been busy," he said. "There was a great deal to be done," she said. He looked at the east wing, where Walt had finally cleared the gutter that had been causing the damp. He looked at the kitchen garden gate, which she had oiled last week, so it opened without a sound. "My letter," he said finally. "The second one. Yes. You were right to send it." He said it the way a man says something he has decided to say plainly, because saying it any other way would take longer. "About Halstead." Isabel waited. "They've been billing for services they weren't providing," he said. "I've engaged a solicitor. It should have been caught before now." He paused. "I didn't look at the accounts closely after Eleanor died. I should have." Eleanor, the first wife. No one had told her the name before. "I'm sorry," Isabel said. "About your wife." He looked at her then, directly, in a way he hadn't before. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. That was all right. She hadn't expected to understand him quickly. "The solicitor will want statements," he said. "About what you found. I've kept copies of everything." A pause. "Of course you have," he said. It wasn't unkind. It was something more than that. Something closer to recognition. The way you recognize a tool that turns out to be exactly the right one for the job. He stayed for 4 days. They did not have many conversations, but the ones they had were real. He told her about the manufacturing business, not proudly, but accurately, as though he assumed she could follow it. She could. She asked about the Eastfield, because the drain was clear now, but the soil would need work before it could be productive again, and she had some ideas about that, and she wanted to know whether he had any objections. He had no objections. He seemed, if anything, slightly startled to be consulted. On the 3rd night they sat in the parlor after dinner. The fire was going. Mrs. Pell had gone to bed. It was the first time Isabel could remember the parlor feeling like a room someone lived in. "You didn't have to do all of this," he said. He was looking at the fire, the garden, the accounts, the letters. "I'm aware," she said. "I wasn't suggesting you had an obligation." "No," she said. "I know." A silence. Why then? He asked. She thought about it. Not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to say it precisely. Because it was neglected, she said. And I dislike neglect. And because I was here and could do something about it, so I did. He looked at her. The same look as before, the one she didn't have a name for yet. I made a poor start, he said. You did, she agreed. He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. He left on a Saturday. He told her, before the carriage came, that he would be back within the month. He said it the way he said most things, straightforwardly, as though it were a business commitment he intended to honor rather than a sentiment. She had decided, sometime in those 4 days, that she could work with that. The month passed. He came back when he said he would, and the month after that. Each time he stayed a little longer. Each time the conversations went a little deeper. Not into feelings exactly, not at first, but into things that mattered. The farm, the business, the state of the world, what she thought and why. He had been married before, and he had loved Eleanor, and that loss had done something to him that he was still in the process of undoing. Isabel understood this without it needing to be said. She had no interest in replacing what was gone. She had only ever been interested in building what was actually there. The Halstead matter was settled in the spring. The solicitor recovered a portion of what had been taken. More importantly, the quarterly fees stopped, the management contract was voided, and a proper accounting was made of everything that had and hadn't been done. Fletcher signed papers in Boston. Isabel gave 2 statements. It was, in the end, the kind of justice that was quiet and complete and did not make the papers, which was exactly the kind of justice she had wanted. By the time the kitchen garden produced its first real harvest, beans and late tomatoes and more herbs than they could reasonably use, Fletcher was staying for 2 weeks at a time, and then 3. He took to walking the orchard in the evenings. Sometimes she walked with him, sometimes she didn't. He had stopped being startled when she had opinions, and she had stopped being surprised when he listened to them. Walt hired 2 men to work the east field. Mrs. Pell hired a kitchen girl. The damp in the east wing dried out by May. The wallpaper in the kitchen was replaced, and the bucket by the back door was retired. One evening in September, exactly 1 year after she had arrived and found the note beside the teapot, Fletcher came and found her in the kitchen garden. She was tying up the last of the climbing roses that she had planted in spring against the south wall. The light was going, the warm amber kind that makes stone look almost golden. He stood for a moment at the gate. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him. For leaving the morning after the wedding. For all of it. He came through the gate. He had his hands in his coat pockets, the way he did when he was saying something that cost him something. For the house. And the accounts, and not writing more than 3 sentences. For assuming you'd manage and not thinking about what that meant, what I was asking you to carry. He paused. I told myself you were capable. You were, but I used that as a reason not to show up, and that was wrong. The rose cane was tied. She smoothed down the twine. I knew what I was agreeing to, she said. More or less. You shouldn't have had to. No, she said. But I managed. She looked at him. And I would like, if it's all the same to you, to keep managing for quite some time. He looked at her, with an expression she recognized now. She had a name for it finally. It was the way a man looks at a woman when he has stopped being surprised by her and started being grateful for her instead. I'd like that, he said. The roses were not quite blooming yet. They would by October, the nurseryman had told her. Late-season climbers, deep red, good in cold weather, stronger in the second year than the first. She thought that was about right.